Margaret Wilson slowly reached for the cup of tea that stood on the edge of the table. 61 years had left the transparent web of veins and the brown stains of age on her arms. Outside the window of her house in suburban Toronto, snow was falling, large flakes falling to the ground, covering everything in a blanket of white. She looked at her watch. 12:30, time stretched interminably slow. Since John, her husband, had died 3 years ago, the days had blended into a monotonous gray mass. Morning coffee, television, gardening in the warmer months, evenings with a book. Sometimes her daughter called, sometimes a neighbor came over. On Sundays, church. Margaret sighed and opened the newspaper. On page 3, she came across a short article about a prisoner correspondence program. "Letters of Hope, reach out to those in need," the headline read. Her gaze stopped at the phrase, "Many prisoners are incommunicado," making it difficult to rehabilitate them. Her fingers trembled slightly as she clipped the ad. "After all," she said to the empty room, "I have too much free time on my hands." A week later, Margaret received her first letter. The envelope stamped with the Millhaven Correctional Facility seal seemed out of place among the bills and flyers. "Dear Margaret, my name is Daniel Crow, and I am 35 years old. I don't know what to write to a man I've never met, but thank you for choosing to write to me. Time flows differently here. Every letter is a window into a world I haven't seen in a long time." His handwriting was neat, with a slight slant to the right. Margaret reread the letter 3 times before replying. The first letter was followed by a second, then a third. Daniel wrote about the books he was reading, his dreams of studying after his release, the stars he saw through the small window of his cell. He never once mentioned what he was serving time for, and Margaret didn't ask. It seemed insignificant against the backdrop of their growing friendship. "Mom, are you out of your mind?" Emily's voice rang with tension. Her daughter, 38 years old, stood in the middle of the living room, clutching one of Daniel's letters in her hands. "You don't even know what he's done." "He's a man who made a mistake," Margaret replied quietly, taking the letter. "We all make mistakes." "Mistakes?" Emily ran her hands through her dark hair. "Mom, people in prison don't just make mistakes. They're criminals. You sound like your father." Margaret pressed her lips together. "Everything is black or white with no shades in between." "And you're too naive." Emily shook her head. "Promise me at least to find out what he's in there for." Margaret nodded reluctantly, but deep down she already knew that it wouldn't change her decision to continue corresponding. In the next letter, she cautiously asked a question. The answer came 2 weeks later, the longest pause in their communication. "I have killed a man, Margaret. In a fight I started myself. I was given 15 years, of which I served 8. I understand if you don't want to write to me again." Margaret stared at the letter for a long time. Somewhere deep inside, fear stirred, but she forced herself to continue reading. Daniel described his past life: drugs, alcohol, bad company. The night he beat a man to death in a bar over some pointless argument. "Every day I live with it. Every day I try to be a better person. I realize I don't deserve forgiveness, but I hope to redeem myself one day." Margaret put the letter aside and stared out the window for a long time. Then she sat down and began to write a reply. Snow was falling when she first came to Millhaven. The reformatory loomed as a gray hulk behind a high fence. Margaret went through metal detectors, inspections, and long hallways before she found herself in the visiting room. Daniel was nothing like she'd imagined him to be. Taller, broader in the shoulders, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. Tattoos on his forearms, abstract patterns and symbols of some kind. But the smile was exactly as she'd pictured it from her letters. Warm, with a slight uncertainty. "Margaret," he said her name with a special softness. "Daniel," she smiled involuntarily. They talked for 2 hours, about books, about her garden, about his plans to get an education. He asked questions and listened, really listened. Margaret couldn't remember the last time someone had listened so intently to her stories about everyday life. At the other end of the room, Detective Robert Morrison watched them, pretending to look through files. The 53-year-old investigator in charge of the Crow case had come here after a call from Officer Perry, the prison warden, who had noticed a change in the prisoner's behavior. "It's like he's been transformed in the last few months," Perry said. "He's enrolled in all kinds of classes, helps out at the library, even started going to group therapy. It's too drastic a change." Morrison watched Crow smile at the older woman. Too perfect a smile, gestures too calibrated. The detective remembered Daniel Crow very differently, aggressive, manipulative, without a shred of remorse. A crime scene from 8 years ago came to mind. Mark Thompson's mangled body on the floor of the bar, blood everywhere, and Crow sitting calmly in a chair when the police arrived. "He said I was nothing," was all Daniel had explained then. Morrison closed the folder. Something wasn't right here. Something in Crow's eyes as he looked at the woman. Not warmth, calculation. After the visit, Margaret sat in the car for a long time without starting the engine. Her heart was beating too fast for her age. She felt foolish, like a teenager after a first date. But there was something about Daniel, something that made her feel alive for the first time in years. A text from Emily was waiting for her at home. "How did it go? Please be careful." Margaret didn't reply. Instead, she pulled out a picture she'd secretly taken in the visitation room, Daniel smiling, looking away. She placed the picture on her bedside table, next to the picture of her late husband. That night, in his cell, Daniel Crow lay on his bunk, staring up at the ceiling. His cellmate was already asleep. Daniel pulled an envelope from under the mattress, Margaret's last letter with a picture of her house, a large, well-kept lot. "The house was left to me after John died. Sometimes it seems too big for one person, but it holds all my memories." Daniel ran his finger over the photo. A smile slowly stretched his lips. Not the warm smile Margaret had seen. A very different one. Officer Perry walked past the camera and stopped for a moment. Daniel's expression changed instantly. "Everything all right, Crow?" "Yes, sir. Just thinking about the future." Perry nodded and walked on. Something in the prisoner's voice made him shiver. For the next few months, Margaret came every week. Letters came almost daily. Emily stopped asking about Daniel after a few fights. "He's changed," Margaret insisted. "He's not the same person he was." "People don't change that quickly," Emily countered. "You just don't like that I'm happy at last." Those words ended their last conversation on the subject. Detective Morrison was also watching the relationship develop. He reviewed phone records, checked Margaret's financial transactions. The woman had started sending small amounts of money to Crow's prison account. "He's playing her," Morrison told Perry. "I've seen this before. But we can't interfere without evidence," the officer replied. "Technically, he's not violating anything." Morrison knew Perry was right. But something, an intuition developed over 25 years of work, kept him on his toes. One evening, after a particularly long date, Daniel returned to his cell with a special gleam in his eyes. "Good news?" the cellmate asked. "The best," Daniel smiled. "My darling Margaret has agreed to be my wife." The cellmate whistled. "Really? The old lady has that much of a crush?" "She's lonely," Daniel shrugged. "And she has something I need." "What's that?" "Freedom, and the money to use it." In her house, Margaret stared at the ring Daniel's lawyer had brought today. A simple silver ring was all he could afford, but to her, it was more precious than diamonds. "I'm going crazy," she whispered to her reflection. "At my age." But the image of Daniel stayed in her head, his letters, full of hope and plans for the future. His touch during their meetings, careful, almost reverent, like she was something precious. Perhaps it was madness, but for the first time in years, she felt truly alive. The wedding took place on Thursday, in the gray visitors' room of the Millhaven Correctional Facility. Margaret wore a modest blue dress and a small hat with a veil, the only concession to tradition. Daniel wore his usual prison clothes, but with his shoes polished to a shine. Only the priest, 2 guards, and Daniel's young lawyer, who had agreed to be a witness, were present. Emily had refused to come. "I will not participate in this madness," she wrote in a message that Margaret reread 20 times before the ceremony. "Margaret Wilson, do you take Daniel Crow to be your lawfully wedded husband?" asked the priest, an older man with kind eyes but a tense line in his mouth. Yes, she answered quietly but firmly. Daniel looked at her with such tenderness it took Margaret's breath away. When he slipped the thin silver ring onto her finger, his hands trembled slightly, the touching detail she remembered most clearly. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the priest said without the traditional, "You may kiss the bride." The touch of Daniel's lips on her cheek was fleeting, but it seemed to Margaret that time stood still in that moment. In the far corner of the room, Detective Morrison watched the ceremony, pretending to check IDs. There was something in Crow's eyes that made him uneasy, a fleeting glint that disappeared so quickly that Morrison wondered if he was imagining things. "Congratulations, Mrs. Crow," Daniel said as the guards led the priest away. "Sounds unusual, doesn't it?" "Indeed," Margaret smiled, feeling oddly dizzy. At 61, she was a bride again. Mrs. Crow. The next day, Margaret met with her lawyer, Mr. Baker, with whom she had worked since John's time. "Are you sure about this, Margaret?" he asked when she explained why she had come. "Such a change in the will." "I'm absolutely sure," she said with a determination that surprised even herself. "Daniel is my husband. He should be my primary heir." "And what of Emily, your daughter?" "Emily will have a share, of course, but a smaller one. She has her own life, her own career." Mr. Baker took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Margaret, we've known each other 30 years. Let me speak frankly. You married a man serving time for murder. A man you've known for less than a year. Don't you think that's, rash?" "I know Daniel better than anyone," Margaret replied firmly. "He's changed, he's remorseful, and he loves me. You want me to include him in my will as the primary heir to your house and savings?" "Yes, and I want to set up a joint account to help him when he gets out. He's up for parole in a year." Baker sighed and began filling out the paperwork. Margaret looked out the window at the falling fall leaves and felt strangely calm. She was making the right choice. She should be making the right one. After visiting the lawyer, Margaret went to the bank and transferred $20,000 into a special account for Daniel. "For the start of a new life," she wrote in the payment destination column. That same afternoon, Emily Wilson sat across from Detective Morrison in a small cafe near the police station. "I know I sound crazy," she said, clutching her coffee cup so hard her knuckles turned white. "But something strange is going on with my mother. She never acted like this impulsive, reckless. She was always a careful, rational woman." Morrison listened intently, taking notes. "You say she changed her will?" "Yes," Mr. Baker called me. He couldn't divulge the details, but he hinted that I should talk to her. And when I tried, my mom just said it's her life and her decisions. "Technically, she's right," Morrison said cautiously. "We can't invade the privacy of citizens without proof of wrongdoing." "But this man is a criminal," Emily pitched forward. "He's using her." "Unfortunately, marriage to a prisoner is not a crime." Morrison rubbed his chin. "But I understand your concern. I know Daniel Crow handled his case. What do you think of him?" The detective paused, weighing his words. "Officially nothing. He's serving time. His behavior in prison has been impeccable for the last year. Unofficially, I have my doubts about the sincerity of his reincarnation. What can I do?" Emily's voice sounded desperate. "Observe. Stay close to her mother and let me know of any suspicious changes, especially financial ones." Emily nodded, feeling both relieved that she wasn't alone in her suspicions and alarmed that the detective seemed to share her concerns. At Mill Haven, Daniel Crow sat in the prison library, helping to shelve books. Officer Jason Perry watched him, leaning against the door jamb. "You've become quite the model prisoner, Crow," Perry observed. "Library classes, even singing in the prison choir." "I'm trying to change, sir," Daniel smiled, not looking up from his books. "I've been given a chance at a new life. And your new wife is no small part of that, is she?" Something flashed in Daniel's eyes so quickly that Perry wondered if he'd imagined it. "Margaret believes in me," Daniel answered simply. "The first person in a long time who really does." "She seems like a good woman," Perry continued, watching the reaction carefully. "Kind, naive perhaps." "She's not naive," Daniel countered, showing emotion for the first time. "She's smart and perceptive. She just knows how to see the good in people." Perry nodded and walked away, but Daniel's words sounded false. Too right, too rehearsed. That evening of the same day, Perry called Morrison. "There's something wrong with this guy, Rob. I've been working here 15 years, and I've seen things, but Crow, he's playing the part, and he's playing it well." "Any particular cause for concern?" Morrison asked. "Just a gut feeling, but I've heard him talk about his wife's house a lot. Inquires about inheritance laws with the prison lawyer, and he recently requested a special overnight visit. A sleepover? Has he been approved? Not yet. But with his impeccable behavior over the last year, he probably will." Morrison thanked him for the information and hung up. The case was getting more and more disturbing. Margaret, meanwhile, was arranging the photographs in an album. The wedding pictures were modest, taken by Daniel's lawyer with a simple camera. She hadn't hoped for a lavish ceremony, but something ached in her chest as she looked at those faded images. The phone rang. Daniel. He was allowed a weekly call. "Hello, love." His voice sounded soft, with a slight huskiness. "Daniel?" She smiled involuntarily, just saying his name. "I have news. Good news. I've been approved for a sleepover date. Next month." Margaret's heart skipped a beat. Overnight visits are a rare privilege for prisoners of good behavior. A special room like a hotel room where couples can spend the night. "That's wonderful," she said, feeling the color rise to her cheeks. "I miss you so much," he said, longing in his voice. "I'm counting the days until we meet again." After the conversation, Margaret sat staring at the phone for a long time. At 61. A romantic night with her husband, something she hadn't even dreamed of since John's death. The next day, she went shopping, the first time she'd bought clothes for herself rather than groceries in a long time. A new dress, shoes, even perfume. The clerk at the lingerie store gave her a strange look as Margaret picked out a silk nightgown. "It's for a special occasion?" Margaret explained, feeling ridiculous. "Of course, ma'am," the girl replied with a professional smile. "We have models for mature women, more comfortable." Margaret left the store without buying anything. Instead, she ordered things online, using a credit card for online purchases for the first time. At home, she found a letter from Daniel in the mailbox. Despite the weekly visits and calls, he continued to write. Margaret valued these letters more than anything. In them, Daniel opened up, shared thoughts he couldn't express during the short, guarded visits. "Dear Margaret, I often think about our future, about waking up next to you every morning in our home. Breakfast together, walks in the garden. I'm less than a year away from parole. Our life is just beginning." Margaret clutched the letter to her chest. The future. For the first time in years, she had a future to look forward to. In the evening, Emily called. "Mom, would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow?" "Of course, dear." Margaret was glad of the reconciliation. "At the Olive Garden at 1 o'clock? That's fine. Mother, I wanted to apologize. I was too harsh about your, marriage." "That's okay, sweetie. I realize it was unexpected. Dinner was a tense affair." Emily tried to be friendly, but Margaret could sense the falseness in her smile. "You look well, Mother," Emily remarked as she cut the steak. "Younger." "Thank you, dear. I feel better than I have in years." "That's, good." Emily put down her knife and fork. "Mom, I met with Detective Morrison, the one who was on Daniel's case." Margaret tensed. "Why?" "Because I'm worried about you. This man, he could be dangerous." "Daniel has changed," Margaret countered habitually. "He's not the same man he was." "Mother, how well do you know exactly what he did? The details of his crime?" Margaret took a sip of water to cover the trembling in her hands. "He told me. A bar fight. He was drunk, on drugs. He beat a man to death, Mom, with his bare hands. And when the police arrived, he was sitting next to the body, perfectly calm. Said the victim had insulted him." "How do you know these details?" Margaret's voice sounded muffled. "The police report. Morrison showed it to me. It's a public document. A man can change, Emily. You haven't seen him now. How he's working on himself. How he's helping other prisoners." "Mom, I looked into it. His parole is contingent on good behavior. It's about having support on the outside. A home, money, family, everything you've provided for him." "You think he married me just for that?" Margaret tried to smile, but her lips wouldn't do it. "That at 61 I can't be attractive to a man?" "I didn't say that," Emily said softly. "But I'm scared for you. And I'm not the only one. Morrison is concerned too. Morrison just doesn't believe in fixing people. Margaret stood up, pulling out her purse. Typical cop. To him, a criminal is always a criminal. Mom, I've seen him a few times. He's not like that. He really cares. I'll pay the bill. Margaret put the money on the table. Thank you for lunch, dear. I have to go now. Emily watched her mother walk away, her back straight, her step resolute. But in the car, Margaret allowed herself what she couldn't in front of her daughter: tears. Emily's words had struck a nerve. Hadn't such thoughts crossed her mind in her sleepless nights? Didn't she ask herself what a 35-year-old man found in a woman who could be his mother? But then she remembered Daniel's letters, his eyes when he'd looked at her, the words of love spoken in whispers during their brief encounters. And the doubts receded. In Millhaven, Daniel Crow sat in his cell, looking at a picture of Margaret's house. His cellmate Rick was playing cards with another inmate. "Getting out soon, huh, Crow?" Rick asked. "A year or two and you'll be free. Especially with all this support on the outside." "Less," Daniel smiled. "A lot less. Lucky with the wife. Got a sleepover date coming up, huh?" Rick winked. The old lady wasn't a looker, but who cared when she had a house like this? Daniel gave him a hard look, and Rick shivered. "I'm sorry, man. Didn't mean to insult your lady." Daniel remained silent, going back to studying the picture. Huge yard, old trees, secluded location. Perfect. As the guard walked past the camera, Daniel quickly hid the photo. "Crow, the block commander wants to see you," the guard said. "Something about your sleepover date." "Coming," Daniel nodded, carefully keeping his expression neutral. But as he walked down the hallway, his lips twitched in a barely perceptible smile. Date day arrived on a gloomy Saturday in November. Heavy clouds covered the sky. Promising snow by evening, Margaret carefully packed her bag. Prison rules strictly limited what she could bring to an overnight visit. No electronics, minimal jewelry, simple clothes with no metal parts. She put a photo album in the bag, a newly compiled one with pictures of the house and garden, a few books they'd discussed in letters, and a small gift, a watch she'd bought for Daniel. Simple but elegant, authorized by the prison authorities. The phone rang as she was zipping up her bag. Emily. "Mom, are you sure you want to do this?" Her daughter's voice sounded strained. "I can come over. We could spend the weekend together." "It's settled, dear," Margaret replied softly. "I'm on my way. Please be careful, and call me when you get back." "I will. Love you, Emily." Margaret hung up the phone and looked at herself in the mirror. She had chosen a simple blue dress, a color that Daniel had said suited her particularly well. Her hair, usually bunched up, was loose around her shoulders today. Light makeup. At 61, she wasn't trying to look younger, just a better version of herself. "You look ridiculous," she whispered to her reflection, but smiled. There was something liberating about feeling like a girl in love at her age. The drive to Millhaven took almost an hour. Margaret turned on the radio to distract herself from her growing excitement. News, music, commercials, everything blended into an indecipherable background. At the same time, Detective Robert Morrison sat in his office looking through files. Daniel Crow's case file lay open. "Sir, there's a call from Officer Perry at Millhaven," the assistant announced as she peeked through the door. Morrison picked up the phone. "Morrison here. Detective, it's Perry. We've got a problem. I tried to postpone the sleepover date for Crow, but the brass can't see any reason. His behavior's been impeccable for the last year." "What exactly is your concern, Perry?" "I was walking by his cell yesterday and overheard a cellmate talking to him. Crow mentioned some kind of plan. I couldn't hear the details, but the tone... He seemed like a different person, not the model prisoner everyone sees." Morrison rubbed his forehead. "I can try to talk to your superiors, but without concrete evidence." "I know. Just wanted to give you a heads up. Date tonight, 5 p.m. to 10 a.m. tomorrow morning." After the conversation, Morrison sat motionless for a while, then dialed Emily Wilson's number. "Miss Wilson? Detective Morrison. Is your mother going on a date with Crow tonight?" "Yes." Emily's voice was tense. "She's on her way. I tried to talk her out of it." "Look, maybe I'm being overly cautious, but I have a bad feeling about this. Can you call your mother? Ask her to reschedule?" "I tried. She won't listen." "Detective, you're scaring me. What's going on?" "Nothing concrete," Morrison sighed. "Intuition. I'm going to Millhaven. I'll try to talk to her before the date. When Margaret arrived in Millhaven, the sky had finally darkened. The first snowflakes were swirling in the air. She went through all the checks and formalities, feeling the strange unreality of what was happening. Mrs. Crow, Officer Perry addressed her at the entrance to the inner block. May I speak with you for a moment? Of course, Margaret smiled. She knew Perry from past visits, a serious but always polite officer. Do you know the rules for a sleepover date? He asked, taking her aside. Yes, they explained it to me on the phone and sent me instructions in the mail. Good, Perry paused. Mrs. Crow, I have to ask, are you sure you want this date? Margaret tensed. What's the matter, officer? I just want to make sure you're comfortable. It's your right to cancel at any time. I'm fine, thank you, Margaret replied coldly. She was tired of everyone thinking her decisions were wrong. Perry nodded. In that case, follow me. He escorted her to the overnight visitation room, a separate room in a special cell block of the prison. The room looked almost like a room in a modest motel, a double bed, a small table with 2 chairs, a private bathroom. The only thing that gave it away was the lack of windows and a security camera in the corner. The camera is for security only, Perry explained, noticing Margaret's stare. It's only pointed at the door, not the bed. The guards only watch the entrance. I see. I'll be on duty tonight. If you need anything, press this button. He pointed to a red button near the door. Daniel will be here in 10 minutes. When Perry left, Margaret sat on the edge of the bed. Her hands were trembling. She pulled out a photo album and opened it, trying to distract herself from the nervous anticipation. The door opened exactly 10 minutes later. Daniel walked in, uncuffed, but accompanied by a guard who remained at the door. He was in plain gray prison clothes, but he looked better than usual, smoothly shaved, his hair neatly combed. Margaret! His voice was soft, with a slight huskiness. Daniel! She stood up, unsure of how to act. The guard nodded. You have until 10 in the morning. There will be an inspection at 9 p.m., the emergency button next to the door. When the door closed, Daniel walked over to Margaret and put his arm around her. She snuggled her face into his shoulder, breathing in the smell of prison soap. I can't believe we're finally alone, he whispered, stroking her hair. Me neither. She pulled away and smiled. I brought something for you. She pulled a small watch box out of her bag. Margaret, you shouldn't have. I wanted you to have something from me. Daniel put the watch on, admiring it. It's beautiful, and so are you. She smiled, embarrassed. I brought the photo album. I wanted to show you the house as it will be when you get out. Will you show it to me? They sat down next to each other on the bed, and Margaret opened the album. Pictures of the garden, the kitchen, the living room, everything that was to be theirs in common. Just then, Detective Morrison's car parked at the entrance to Millhaven. He walked quickly to the checkpoint, showing his ID. I need to speak to the block commander and Mrs. Margaret Crow right away, he told the guard. Mrs. Crow is already on a date, sir. It started about half an hour ago. I must see her. That's impossible, sir. Sleepover dates are not interrupted unless absolutely necessary. Morrison clenched his fists. Where's Officer Perry? On duty in the visiting block. Take me to him. In the visiting room, Daniel and Margaret finished looking through the scrapbook. Daniel stood up and walked over to the small window in the door, the only way to see the hallway. Is something wrong? Margaret asked. No, he turned around with a smile. It's just unusual. So much time alone. He sat down beside her and took her hands in his. I'm so grateful to you, Margaret, for everything you do for me, for believing in me. It's easy to believe in someone you love. Daniel kissed her gently on the cheek, then on the lips. Margaret felt her heart beat faster. It had been so many years since she'd experienced this thrill, this excitement. In the corridor of the dating block, Morrison found Perry checking the monitors. Detective? What are you doing here? How are they? Morrison nodded at the monitor showing the entrance to the visiting room. All quiet, Perry replied. Checked it 5 minutes ago. They're looking at some kind of scrapbook. I need to talk to her, Morrison insisted. We can't interrupt a date without a reason, Perry shook his head. You know the rules. Damn it, Perry, it was your intuition that made me come here. And I'm still concerned. But we have no reason to interfere. Crow hasn't done anything illegal. Morrison ran his hand through his hair. Can I at least take a look at the monitors? Sure. Perry pointed to the screen. But the camera's only pointed at the door. That's all we can see. Morrison stared at the gray image of an empty corner of the room with the edge of the bed. He felt helpless, a terrible feeling for a detective with 25 years' experience. Emily Wilson dialed her mother's number for the 5th time. The phone was turned off. Prison rules didn't allow cell phones on visits. She left another message. Mom, when you hear this, please call me back immediately. I'm worried. In the visiting room, Daniel was pouring tea from a small kettle provided by the administration. Sugar? He asked. No, thank you. Margaret watched his movements, confident, elegant. How could he be the man Emily had told her about? The one who had beaten a man to death? You're quiet, Daniel observed, handing her a cup. What are you thinking about? About us, she answered honestly. About what our future will be like. It's going to be beautiful. He sat down next to her. In 7 months, I'll be free. We'll have a new life. 7 months? Margaret repeated. It seems like such a long time. Sometimes I think, Daniel hesitated, that those 7 months could be shortened. What do you mean? Nothing concrete. He shook his head. Just dreams. He glanced again at the watch she'd given him. It was beautiful. Expensive, I suppose. Not really, she lied. You're too kind to me, Margaret. His voice grew quieter. A lot of people think I don't deserve to be so happy. A wife like you. People like to judge others. Yes. He took her hand. Tell me again about our home, about how we're going to live. Margaret began to talk. The garden they would cultivate together, the kitchen where they would cook, the little room upstairs that she thought would be Daniel's study. She talked and he listened, stroking her hand. Did you change the will like we discussed? He asked suddenly. Margaret stopped half-heartedly. Yes. But why are you asking about it now? I just want to make sure everything's okay. What if something happens to me here, or to you while I'm inside? I want to know that our future is protected. Nothing will happen, Margaret smiled nervously. In 7 months you'll be out and we'll be together. Yes. He looked at the clock again. 7 months. Something in his tone made Margaret tense. She sipped her tea to hide her sudden anxiety. I've opened an account for you, she said, changing the subject. In your name, $20,000 to start with, so you'll have funds when you get out. 20,000, Daniel repeated, generous. It's just a start. When you get out, everything I have will be ours in common. Daniel smiled and kissed her hand. You're an amazing woman, Margaret. She was relieved the moment of tension had passed. It showed. Do you have any plans when you get out? Work? School? A few ideas, he answered evasively. But the main thing is to be with you. In the monitoring room, Perry saw movement on the screen as Daniel came to the door and looked through the window. He's checking the corridor, Morrison said. Why? Maybe he's just nervous, Perry shrugged. But I'll go check it out. He stepped out into the hallway, went to the door of the visiting room, and peered cautiously through the window. Daniel was sitting next to Margaret, and they were talking. Everything looked normal. Perry turned back to Morrison. Nothing suspicious. Something's wrong, Perry. I can feel it. So do I, the officer admitted. But what can we do? In the visiting room, Daniel stood up and went to the door again. What are you doing? Margaret asked. Checking in. He turned around with a smile, but it was different. Not the warm smile she knew. There was something predatory in that smile. Checking on what? The guards, he answered simply. They're changing now. There's always a shift change between 9 and 10. Margaret set the cup down. Her hands were shaking. Why do you need to know the guard's schedule? Daniel walked slowly toward her. His movements had changed, becoming more fluid, reminiscent of a predator's gait. Because I have a plan, Margaret, and I don't want to be interrupted. A plan? Her throat was dry. What plan? Daniel sat down next to her, too close. His hand rested on her shoulder, not gently as before, but forcefully. You know, these 7 months are too long to wait for an inheritance." The blood rushed from Margaret's face. "What do you mean?" "Don't pretend to be more stupid than you are." His voice became hard. "You changed your will, opened an account in my name. If anything happens to you, it all becomes mine." "Daniel." She tried to get up, but his hand held her up. "Sit," he ordered. "We're not done talking. You never loved me." It wasn't a question, but a statement. A strange calmness descended on Margaret. A part of her had always known the truth. "Loved?" He grinned. "Margaret, look at yourself. You're old enough to be my mother. What love could there be to talk about?" Every word was like a whip, but Margaret showed no pain. "Then why all this? The letters, the dates, the marriage?" "Because I want to get out of here and start a new life, with money, with a house. You're my ticket to freedom." "And now what?" Margaret tried to speak calmly, even though her heart was about to jump out of her chest. "You're gonna kill me? Right here in prison?" "It would look like a heart attack." Daniel tilted his head, studying her. "A woman your age, the excitement of a date. No one would be surprised, and I'll be an inconsolable widower." His hand slid to her neck, his thumb finding her pulse. "Margaret Wilson," he said softly. "A foolish, lonely woman who believed a young man could fall in love with her." In the monitoring room, Perry straightened suddenly. Crow was at the door again. "Something's wrong," Morrison insisted. "We've got to check it out. Without a reason, we can't." "To hell with the rules." Morrison headed for the door. "I'll take responsibility." Perry followed him, pulling out a key card. Margaret looked into the eyes of the man she had married and saw nothing in them but cold calculation. "You forgot something, Daniel," she said quietly. "The emergency button, the camera. Security will see." "The camera is pointed at the door, not the bed," he smiled. "And the button, you can't get to it." His grip on her neck tightened. "Please," she whispered, "don't do this." "I don't have a choice, Margaret. I can't wait another 7 months. Now," he leaned toward her, "don't fight it. It will be easier for both of us." The sound of the door opening caught them both off guard. Daniel turned around abruptly, his hand still around Margaret's neck. Morrison and Perry froze on the threshold, assessing the situation in a split second. "Crow, get away from her," Perry ordered, pulling out a stun gun. "It's okay, officer." Daniel pulled his hand away but remained seated, blocking Margaret. "We're just talking." "Daniel was going to kill me." Margaret's voice sounded surprisingly calm. "He admitted that he married me for money and inheritance." "Nonsense." Daniel looked offended. "She's upset. Maybe she's on medication." "Get away from her, Crow," Perry repeated, stepping forward. "Now." Daniel realized he was cornered. His gaze flicked from Perry to Morrison, then to the door behind them. Assessing the odds, it all happened in a matter of seconds. Daniel lunged forward toward the exit, but grabbed Margaret on the way out, using her as a shield. "Get back!" he shouted, wrapping his elbow around her neck. Perry and Morrison stopped, weapons at the ready. "Let her go, Crow," Morrison said. "You're only making it worse." "Drop the weapon." Daniel tightened his grip. Margaret gasped, her face reddening. "Drop it, or I'll break her neck." A second stretched into an eternity. Perry slowly lowered the stun gun. Morrison, after a moment's hesitation, followed suit. "Good," Daniel said, backing toward the door, dragging Margaret with him. "And now we're going to walk out of here in peace." It was at that moment that Margaret made a decision. If she was going to die, she wasn't going to let Daniel get away with it. Gathering all her strength, she elbowed him in the stomach and shouted, "Shoot!" Daniel roared in pain and rage. Perry lunged forward with the stun gun. Morrison reached for his gun, but Daniel was faster. In one swift motion, he spun Margaret around and slammed her head against the wall with monstrous force. The sound was horrible, the deafening crunch of breaking bone. Perry fired the stun gun, but it was too late. Margaret slid to the floor, leaving a trail of blood on the wall. Daniel collapsed, electrocuted. Morrison rushed to Margaret, fumbling for a pulse. His hand was stained with blood. "Call the paramedics!" he shouted to Perry, but his face showed he already knew the answer. There was no pulse. 2 hours later, it was over. Margaret's body was taken away. Daniel was moved to solitary confinement with maximum security. Morrison stood in the empty visiting room, staring at the blood on the wall. "I could have prevented this," he said to Perry. "If I'd gotten here sooner. If we'd broken the rules." "You couldn't have known," Perry replied. "We both suspected, but without proof. I need to call her daughter." Morrison rubbed his face. God, how to tell her. It was a rainy day a week later. The cemetery was drowned in fog, making the figures of people blurry, ghostly. Morrison stood at the fresh grave of Margaret Wilson. The ceremony was over, everyone had gone, and it was just him and Emily. "He'll get life," Morrison said, looking at the marble stone. "Without parole." What did it matter now? Emily stared at her mother's grave without crying. The tears had ended days ago. She loved him, really loved him. He knew how to manipulate people. Morrison shook his head. "It's not your fault. And it wasn't hers. People like Crow feed on loneliness and vulnerability." Did he say he wanted to kill her for the money? Yeah. His plan was to wait for the inheritance and start a new life. But he decided 7 months was too long to wait. They stood in silence, listening to the sound of the rain. The drops dripped down the tombstone like tears. She'd been happy these past months, Emily finally said. In spite of everything, she felt alive, loved. Was it real? Morrison asked, more to himself than to her. The way she felt? For her, yes. Emily leaned over and placed a white rose on the grave. And maybe that's all that matters. Morrison nodded, lifting the collar of his coat. On the walk back to the car, he thought about the case file that would now be closed, about Crow, who would spend the rest of his life behind bars, about the woman who wanted just a little warmth in the twilight of her life. Sometimes the worst crime isn't murder, but betrayal of trust. Morrison knew that better than most. He cast one last glance at the cemetery and got into his car. The rain was intensifying, turning the world into a blurry gray picture. Somewhere in the back of his mind, the detective hoped that Margaret Wilson had finally found the piece she'd been searching for so long. The case was closed, but it remained an open wound in Morrison's mind, a reminder of how loneliness can make us blind, and how cruelly it can be exploited by those who see in others only a means to an end. He started the engine and slowly pulled away, leaving behind the final resting place of a woman whose only mistake was wanting too much to believe in love.